Hello and welcome to the Small Business Sewing Podcast. Join host Kathleen, that's me, from Sunny Mountain Patterns, and Branalyn from Daily Sews and Stuff, and guest experts as we discuss how to run successful sewing businesses, innovations in sewing, and ways to make more money doing what you love.
Today we are covering a topic that Kathleen loves to talk about, which is benchmarking. So I'm going to let Kathleen tell us what benchmarking is, and then we'll go from there.
So basically, benchmarking is an industrial engineering technique to see what others in the industry or outside of the industry are doing to solve a problem. For the best example I remember is Harley-Davidson in the 2000s did a benchmark study, which sounds very buzzy, but they were trying to find a way to have labels for their garments, especially for their ladies, not their ladies, but the female population. Mm-hmm. But they had to have labels with multiple languages on it. Problem is they wanted it to look attractive, so it still looked good when you were buying it, but they needed to have, I think, 4 or 5 different languages all on the same label to be compliant for different countries. Now, the problem with that is it's a label for a garment, as you know, it's not very large. And with the consideration that you need to still make it look attractive, but not too busy, there's a lot they didn't have experience in. So their benchmarking journey actually led them to talking to a cosmetics company because they have extremely small packages. They have to have multiple languages, and it has to be incredibly attractive looking, right? Because a lot of people buy based off of what the bottle looks like. So that's an example of
cosmetics.
Exactly. That's an example of benchmarking that is completely outside of Harley-Davidson's customer base or outside of their area. But in general, the dry definition is that you're tracking things and trying to improve them. So one of the ways to try to improve them is to go to other companies, either competitors, which they're probably not going to help you out, the competitors, partners, or people in related industries, and see what they're doing and see if you can apply their techniques. And then after you've done that, see if you have any improvement on the tracked records. Now, that's incredibly dry. But that's basically the definition of benchmarking. It originally, apparently, according to Wikipedia, because I did research, it originated from when they were doing the old rifle manufacturing. They would mark out on the bench like the lengths that they had to make the rifles and that sort of thing.
Right, and it was a way to standardize it, which is interesting because teacher me hears benchmark, and I think benchmark testing, and I think kind of like a standardized testing you do throughout the year to see where your kids are and what you need to do to make sure that you're on track for the year. And I, at first, thought that was in no way related. But now that I'm hearing you talk about it, it's very related. It's that same thing. You want to compare where you are, where you should be, and figure out how to get there. And I'm also reminded of my husband read this book about Toyota and how they run their factories. And they do a very lean manufacturing thing. Yep. And he based
Kanban.
a lot of, I'm sorry?
Kanban. It's called Kanban. That's how
he calls it lean manufacturing. Is that the Japanese word for it?
Well, no, that's actually what it's called in Japan. It's not lean manufacturing. Okay. So lean manufacturing is actually an outshoot from Kanban. Kanban was pretty much the one that started it all off. It's Kanban, then Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, 5S, ACE. These are things that nobody's really going to understand. I'm an industrial engineer, so that was like my bread and butter for a while.
Right.
So yeah, exactly.
Benchmark testing.
Your husband is a woodworker, right?
Right.
But he's looking at manufacturing techniques and ideas that Toyota is doing. Toyota obviously does not do any type of woodworking. So you have to, if you're a sewer or a maker, you want to look around and see what similar methods people are doing, but not necessarily sewing related or making related. So say you were a sewer, but you want to know how to manage maybe multiple sizes. You can go see what, say, a jeweler is doing, if you have a friend that's a jeweler, because they have to manage multiple sizes in incredibly expensive material.
Right.
Which is also another good source for figuring out how to manage your material consumption. Of course, there's things that a jeweler can do that a sewer can't. Like you can melt down the gold and reform ingots or wire, but you can't do that.
Make your ring a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, which is kind of hard to do with sewing a garment. But.
Right. But and if you have offcuts of the fabric, you can't melt it down and make another piece of fabric, which would
No.
be super cool if we could do that. It would save so
I
much
mean, you could make a
manufacturing costs.
quilt, but it would be a whole different thing.
Correct. You couldn't make the same the base
No,
material, so you wouldn't have the
no,
exact same fabric to work from. Uh,
right. So even though this is kind of from your industrial engineer world, this has some very real applications for people who are sewing and especially people who are production sewing.
oh, of
So
course.
so if we take this, like my husband who's a woodworker looking at an automotive company or Harley Davidson looking at a cosmetic company, what you were just saying about looking outside your specific industry makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned jewelers. What are some other things that you were thinking about as far as places we could look and things that we could be thinking about that other good lord, I lost my train of thought.
That other sewers can look at,
Industries.
but
That's it
right,
was
that's not
yeah. That
competitors
other
for you.
industries are doing well.
One thing, like I said, jewelers is a great source because they have to be very conservative with the material that they're using, their product management, and their advertising. Another area is you can look at crocheters because a lot of them, mind you, they don't necessarily make a lot of money crocheting the item. It might be that they're selling lessons or they're doing affiliate marketing. You can see how they're doing things such as doing top-down views of tutorials. Sometimes if you're sewing, not everybody that's listening to this podcast, I'm hoping, necessarily sews a garment to sell. They might be
Right.
doing other business related things, making money off of sewing, which might be doing lessons, or you might want to do a video showing the garment being made in production. If you've
Right.
never
So
done that before, you might want to go find out what somebody who does this all the time, how they're doing it. If it's a knitter, they're more likely to talk to you about it because you're not a competitor versus if you were selling, for example, christening gowns, you're probably not going to want to go ask somebody else selling christening gowns, hey, I want to cut into your market. Can you please tell me your secrets? They're not going to, they might be generous and do it, but more than likely the answer is going to be no.
what you do is create patterns. That's your small business sewing related
Niche, right, right.
niche. Yes. And what I do is YouTube videos and things like that. So, I can look at other YouTubers, not necessarily
Sewing related.
tutorials, sewing YouTubers, but YouTubers that are vlogging or YouTubers that are doing tutorials on makeup or whatever else that can be really helpful. A lot of the YouTubers that I like to watch they call themselves costumers and they do like costuming type things,
And they
which is
show
not an
in process video.
exactly, exactly. It's not an area of sewing that I necessarily want to do myself, but it's really awesome to watch how they make those videos. What do you, as a pattern designer, what do you look at as other places that where you can get some benchmarking?
So I'm ashamed to say I actually watch a lot of videos on pattern drafting and assembly technique because I'm always trying to find out easier ways to do assembly for my instructions for my garments. Honestly, the biggest thing that I've noticed for me is to do flat lay and figuring out how to do flat lay for almost every single part up until you're basically sewing either the inseam or the side seam. So YouTube's been great for that. And these are not always people that are my direct competitors. And of course, I'm just learning it from YouTube. I'm not necessarily emailing them or chatting with them going, hey,
Right.
I design patterns in your niche. Can you go tell me how you do blank? Another thing I did was I actually was part of a course where one of the other attendees was a graphic designer. I am going to freely admit this. All of my drafting is done on Illustrator because it's a very easy to access program. Now, the
Right.
thing is that when you take courses such as Melly Sews has a great course for doing pattern drafting on Illustrator. You have to already know how to pattern draft, but there's things on Illustrator that there's features that help make my production of patterns faster or more accurate that are not covered because she's a pattern drafter, she's a designer, she's not a graphic designer. I talked to my friend or my classmate, I guess you could call it, and she's like, here is what I think. I showed her a video of what I was trying to do and what I was doing currently. And I'm like, I think there's an easier way. What do you think? And she sent me a video back because and she goes, here, this is what you can do. This is the technique. This is a shortcut. And I found all these little shortcuts that help my production for when I'm making patterns themselves, make it much easier. The problem is it's all case specific, right? It's not,
Right.
if you're a sewer, go contact a metal worker and go see what they do. Like that's not always the case. It depends on what your problem is and what you think you want to fix. You also might find that they're doing things that you didn't even know you could do to fix the problem.
Or sometimes a problem you didn't even realize you had.
Correct. So when you go and contact these people, one, you should also help and share what you do so that they can get something out of it, not that they're just giving you away secrets. And two, you should keep your eyes open for more than just the one specific problem that you contacted them for, because you might learn even more and get more value out of it.
So I know when my husband was looking into the lean manufacturing, one of the things that he was really impressed with was how everything had a place and everything had a very labeled place and everything had to go exactly where it was supposed to, which is something I had been trying to do for years in our
Oh,
kitchen.
yeah, no,
And
we'll get into this in a later topic. There's definitely value in that.
yes, but I mean, this was something that he was looking into work, and all of a sudden it helped in our life in the kitchen because finally he was like, oh, so the pots going where the pots go actually does help. And that's kind of a silly example, but that wasn't even something he was looking for whenever he started looking into lean manufacturing. So that looking what you were saying about looking for other things that you can do is really a great idea. Okay, so one of the things that you wrote down that you wanted to include, and I don't think I'm giving you the opportunity to do it, but you said what gets measured gets managed. So you want to expand on that a little bit because that
Oh,
phrase is sticking with
okay.
me.
So I'll repeat it again. It's what gets measured gets managed. If you do not know how long it takes you to make a garment, how do you know if you're improving your process? How do you know if that new technique of, say, doing it, like I said, sewing on the flat really improves? Or are you just wasting your time? Maybe it's not even improvement, maybe it's worse. So, what you need to start off is what you're doing right now. And it's really dry, but this is like my thing. Uh, you get yourself a stopwatch or a timer and you do your process. You can't just do it for one. You have to do it for multiple. If you're a production sewer, you're going to be doing multiple.
Right.
Statistically, anything under 5 is probably not useful. You probably need to do more than that. And you want to try to keep all of the same thing. So even if you have to make 10 shirts, if you need like 2 different sizes, you probably want to stay around the same size just to get a ballpark idea of how long it takes you on average to do a garment from start to finish or individual tasks. So, for example, if you need to cut out your fabric, you probably want to find out how long it takes you per piece or per garment for that particular type of garment to cut out. That way you can tell if you're going to be going over to a projector, for example, or electronic scissors, how much time you're saving based off of that. Or if it takes more time and you're just like, well, that was a terrible idea. I know not to do that, which of course we're going to get into projector sewing later because it's a really cool idea to save you time on paper and pattern assembly and cutting. But we'll get into that later. So the reason you want to measure what you already are doing right now, even if you know there's a problem, is you want to know quantifiably how much time, how much material, or how much effort you're wasting. So now the thing with effort, it's a little hard because it's a perceived value. It's not an actual measured value versus it takes me 10 minutes to cut out 5 garments, or I'm wasting 1.5 yards per garment type of thing. The perceived value, mind you, and this is completely not anything to do with, well, it is something with benchmarking. It should technically be only on a scale of 5 because humans can't really tell the difference between more than 5 gradations of that type of feeling. So whenever you go to the doctor and they go, how much does it hurt you on a scale of 1 to 10? Really, that's kind of BS because you can't.
I'm always like, I don't know.
I don't know. Like, is a 10 passed out? Like, what's the scale here? But if it's a 1 to 5, you can probably be like, well, it's halfway between extremely painful where I can't operate. And it's like 1 is,
Right.
or 0 is like no pain at all. I'm feeling fantastic. Okay. It's a 2.
Yeah.
So really when you're scheduling on your feeling of things, try to do to 5. And this is my professional opinion, but not professional opinion. So
Right.
that's just a
But it makes
general
sense.
guideline.
I mean, you can also do something and you can be like, okay, doing this way saves me 10 minutes per garment, but I absolutely hate it.
Right.
Then
So
that might
perhaps it
not
should be
actually
weighted.
be worth your 10 minutes.
Correct. Let's use a good example. If
Okay.
you're trying to lose weight, not you
Mhm.
specifically, you're lovely, as is. If you're
If
trying to
one
lose
is
weight,
trying to lose weight.
how do you know how much weight you're losing if you don't weigh yourself first? How do you know if you're going anywhere? If your diet or your exercise regimen, and please don't take any diet exercise suggestions from me. How do you know if you're getting anywhere? If you don't weigh yourself first. It's the same
Right.
idea. So some of the solid measurement techniques that you can use are, as I said, time yourself on multiple garments. I would suggest 10 or more. Time yourself on individual pieces. Track on a spreadsheet. I know some people hate spreadsheets, it gives them the rash, but track on your spreadsheet how much fabric a particular garment uses, or how
If you
much on
absolutely hate a
average so
spreadsheet,
many garments for a certain size uses, because usually you try to tile it together on an industrial
right.
scale.
If you absolutely hate doing a spreadsheet, you can just make yourself a chart that basically does the same thing.
That's a
Make
spreadsheet. That's old
yes,
school
but
spreadsheet. I'm just letting you
right,
know.
exactly. If you hate doing Excel or whatever, you can just do a chart and put it up on the wall and keep track of it by hand, which is,
Correct.
yes, an old school
But
spreadsheet,
don't
but
try to keep it up in your brain, because you're going to
right,
forget. And you're going to have
right.
that rose colored glasses. So that, all the women who have their kids and they're 10, and the woman like, oh, childbirth wasn't that bad. You forgot,
It's
right?
been
You have that
decades.
selective amnesia. I'm going
Yes.
to tell you, I didn't get any drugs for my kids, and this is a total side story. Either one, it just worked out that way. And I'm not looking to do it again. I remember how much it hurt. But people get selective amnesia. They forget, oh, yeah, no, I only spent $20 on food out last week. And then they look at their credit card and they find out they've spent $87. True story. I did this last week. So write it down and make it somewhere where you can easily see or easily access, and you can continuously add on. So
Mhm.
the idea of benchmarking is that you need to know where you're coming from first. And I'm really hammering this home because it's a very important task first.
Mhm.
And if you look, you can Google search, look it up, what's benchmarking on Wikipedia. Uh, it does not hammer home the importance of knowing how much you're spending, how much time you're taking, how difficult it is, or other factors. So then,
So, in a very short sentence, benchmarking is all about improving,
right.
and it's about doing it in a quantifiable way so that you can see exactly how much you are improving.
Correct. And doing the quantifiable way actually really helps you, because if you're seeing improvement, if you're seeing decreases in time, not just your feeling, you're more encouraged to continue on with the process, or to try to refine that process even more. Same with working out. If you're working out and you're on a diet, but you're not losing any weight, how motivated are you to continue this diet
Right,
and working out? Usually not a whole lot. So
right.
you need, for benchmarking in this case, you need some concrete wins to keep going, or to say, yeah, this is a great direction. From an industrial engineering standpoint, a lot of companies, they don't want to waste the money if it's not going to work. So they do little experiments and see if it's going to work, and then say, okay, this works great. We're going to implement for everybody.
But just like whenever you're dieting, if all you're doing is weighing yourself,
It's
your
not
weight might
right.
not change. But if you
Correct.
are taking your weight and you're taking your measurements may start to change even though your weight, like every time I've ever started to work out, I've not lost any weight, but I'll lose inches fairly quickly.
I'm going to tell you the
So,
scale lies, the big fat liars.
but the same principle applies. Like if you might not be saving time, but you're saving material, which saves your cost. Or you might not be saving as much material, but you're saving so much time that it's worth the loss. I mean, so
It's come down to the
it would
bottom line. You need to make a
right.
profit in a timely manner.
All right. So when we're talking more specifically about sewing, and we are talking about that bottom line and wanting to make sure that we are making a profit, what are some things that maybe we should be thinking of?
So you want to look at comparing techniques for speed of manufacturing. You can do this in multiple ways. One way, really good way, is to look at YouTube videos to see how people are constructing their garments. If it seems to be a faster way of doing it than what you're doing, or it's more accurate or easier, then by all means try it. But don't just try it for one garment. You have to try it for multiple ones, because you need to get used to the technique, because
Right.
of course sewing is a handmade thing. It's not like you're just sticking it in a machine and then popping it out. Done. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it? We'd all be out of a job. But
It'd be
you
a
can
little sad
try all
too.
of these and really try either to integrate one or two things at one time, because you want to see what's causing the improvement, or what's
Right.
causing a detriment. You don't want to just throw a whole bunch of things and find out, oh God, what the heck happened? You don't know what the source is. So that's
Right.
part of the experimentation. And my other specialty is experimentation. So you have to know which variables are causing the reaction. So if you do a bunch of things, like say you change out what type of serger you use, and then you're also changing your scissors, and also you're changing um, flat lay to some other lay, or what, like you're doing three things at once, and then suddenly it's all gone horribly wrong, and it takes you 10 hours to do something that should take you an hour. What's causing it? You don't know, because there's three things in it. Now you have to go through the
Right.
back process of elimination. You've wasted time. Versus
Right.
had you done only one tweak, change the scissors, and you go, oh, that saved me time. Okay. And then
Eh,
you institute that, get used to it, and then change to a different serger. And then all of a sudden it's shot up to 10 hours. I mean, usually you can tell if it's a serger because the machine's not working, and you
If
want to
you've
chuck it out
refed
the
the
window.
machine 14 times, you're
Right.
well aware.
Right. You're well aware. But this is just an example, of course.
Right.
But
I
if
know.
that shot up all of a sudden, you're like, oh, that was a bad idea. We're gonna back off of that and do something else. So
Mhm.
it's really being methodological about it. It's not just like wildly going off. And unfortunately, this is a lot of people think, oh, this is too scientific for me. This is too rigid. I'm a free spirit. I need to create. Uh, Bottom line is you need to make money. So you can
Right.
be creative
So
in your
in a
making,
sewing,
but when you sew, maybe be a little bit more regimented.
yeah, I'm sorry, we talked right over each other. But what I
That's
was going to
okay.
say is,
Go ahead.
in a sewing based business, there is that side of creativity where you're letting all your creative juices do all your very, what is it, right brained things. But then you also have to be very business oriented too. And that's all those very left brain, I think I got those right, things where you have to be methodical. You have to be slightly regimented. You have to have these processes and these numbers. You have to know if it's making you money.
So, doing benchmarking will tell you a few things. These are the big things that stand out for me on what would be good candidates for benchmarking is the techniques idea for speed of manufacturing. So you need to know how long it takes you to manufacture now, and figure out ways to speed up manufacturing. Quality, so whether or not you have missed seam lines, if you've got gaping holes, if you have stretching where it shouldn't be, that sort of thing. Determining how much fabric you're consuming, because fabric costs money, right, per
Mhm.
yard. So figuring out how you can more effectively or efficiently use the fabric that you have is a big deal. That will save you a lot of money. If you can reduce your fabric cost by 20%, that goes down to your bottom line already.
Right.
And then, of course, and I wrote this down twice, is find new ways to improve production time. But some of the exciting things is projector sewing, using a projector to project down the pattern onto your fabric directly. By the way, Branalyn has a fantastic series on how to set this up, why you should use it, how it works on her YouTube channel, Daily Sews and Stuff. Not giving her extra plug, but I am giving her extra plug.
Thank you.
Uh, Other things have come out recently are electric scissors. There probably have been huge production ones for quite a few decades for the garment industry, but of course, if you're a small business, so you're probably not producing like 100 a stack at a time.
Right.
Ideas such as sewing on the flat, doing continuously sewing instead of snipping every time, just sewing each item together in a line and then going to the next one and putting in a
Right.
line.
And that's a technique from quilting that we call chain piecing and
Mhm.
quilting.
Thank you. I didn't remember the word. I'm not a super production sewer. I just know that's a technique. Batch
Mhm.
sewing. So instead of doing one garment from start to finish, do a more industrial or manufacturing geared thing where you cut everything all at once. You pin it all together for each size. Then you sew all the shoulders at once. I mean, not together in a layer, but sew all the shoulders at once. Do all the hemming at once. Do all the
Right.
pressing. That sort of thing.
It's doing all of one step for each garment rather than finishing a garment first, which is one of those things that I think you would definitely have to do a lot of benchmarking with because for some things, I can see how that would be very beneficial, but for other things, it would be so much faster just to get one garment done at a time.
Right. That's where you have to experiment. And it's
Mhm.
it's depending on what you're making yourself, your setup, how you have it. You might not have enough room to do batch
Mhm.
sewing in that way. Like I have a pretty small room, so I don't have a lot of room to do it. I need to stop saying the word room. It sounds weird now. But it's dependent on yourself. So everything is individuals. Like,
Right.
the idea that Harley Davidson going contacting a cosmetic company might not work for a different company. So that it might not work for,
Mhm.
say, a skate shop. They might have a different aesthetic or uh, a different accepted look. And so going
Mhm.
to a cosmetic company might not help them at all. You have to evaluate based off of what
Right.
helps for you. And you have to think if this amount of time that you're spending trying to research this or talking to the person you're going to be benchmarking with is worth your time as well, because there's time involved in
Right.
that too. But there's also ideas of inventory management. You can look up on YouTube and see what other production sewers or quilters are doing to manage their inventory. And I don't even mean just keeping track of how much you're using or how much you're buying or how much it costs. I mean, where do you store all of it? There's
And
lots
I
of
saw
Instagram photos that they go, "Oh, this is my sewing room." You're like, "Oh, I'm so jealous."
I saw a really cool idea the other day that, and it was on a business sewing group somewhere where they were saying instead of measuring how many yards they have of a fabric or square inches or whatever else, they were measuring their fabric by weight. And that way they could just very quickly weigh their fabric and they would know, okay,
Oh, yeah.
it weighs this much per yard.
You know how
Okay.
many yards you have left
hmm
because right,
And
right,
they can
'cause
also weigh their garment at the end and see. I mean, if it's all quilting cotton, or if it's all the same cotton jersey or whatever. But if it's all made out of the same fabric, you can weigh it at the end, and then you know about how much fabric went into that too.
right. Especially if you know how much weight it is when you buy it, they'll say it's so many ounces. That's a standard
hmm
for the weight or
Right.
the feel or the hand of the fabric. Of course, a thicker fabric is going to weigh more, but you can
hmm
actually figure out how much fabric you've wasted based off of that. So,
hmm
for example, if you are a eco-conscious brand or you are trying to reduce your waste down to zero, you might want to know how much fabric you're consuming to make the item or how much fabric you're wasting, which
That's
that's
a
a whole
good
different
point.
story because sometimes the zero waste, it's not really zero waste. It's just they're using more fabric to make the garment, so they don't have anything to throw away.
Oh, right. Yeah, that makes
Just
sense.
the way you set it up. One of
hmm
the truly zero waste styles, not that this has anything to do with the topic, is kimono style because it's all blocks. And when you have loomed fabric, it's all rectangles.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, of course, that's a great idea to look, and you wouldn't know about this unless you started looking around to see what other people are doing to solve this problem
Exactly.
of how much fabric do I have left? How much fabric did this garment use? Or how much fabric did I waste?
hmm
Waste being in quotations. Uh,
Right.
so that's part of inventory management. So if you didn't know about that, you wouldn't have looked. And that's benchmarking,
Yeah.
applying it to yourself. That's even a measurement technique to find out how much you're consuming. It's also good for your bottom line because you know how much you should be charging for your at least to
Right.
cover your fabric costs.
Your
Um,
materials. Right. So
there's
another
also
thing that
oh
is a
go
very
ahead.
common topic. Another thing that's a very common topic in almost every sewing group I'm in is file and pattern organization.
Unless you're selling only one thing, you probably have files or
Yes.
patterns that you need to organize. So since a lot of us download patterns as PDFs, for example, you have to figure out how to organize it. Everybody's a little different, but if you start asking people around, and that can even be competitors because they're probably not going to be thinking, oh, this is going to help you make more money than me or cut into my customer base. But you can ask around if you're in some of the Facebook groups or the other sewing business sewing groups. You can ask
Mhm.
them how do they manage their files. Look at how they name it. Look at how they set up the file formats. Do they format it by company or a pattern company? Do they format it by size? Do they format it by garment type? I don't know because I only have mine, which
Right.
I have it by garment type because it's all mine. And I just need to know which garment type. Anyway, so that's something you can look into. And these are by no means an exhaustive way of organizing. People
And
have
also,
hangers for their physical patterns.
mhm. And by the way, a lot of these things that we're talking about right now are going to be topics in future podcasts. So if you are leaving this going, well, that's a great question, but I still don't know the answer, stay tuned
Stay
because
tuned.
we'll be talking
Something's
about some
coming.
more of these.
And if you really want to, if you have a burning question, you want to ask it, go ahead and join our Facebook group.
The Small Business Sewing podcast is our page, and the Small Business Sewing community is our group. And
Yep.
asking in the group will make sure that we'll see that and be able to answer.
And
But
it's free to
let's
join.
finish this.
Anyway, let's
It is free
continue
to join.
on.
Let's finish our topic here.
So one of the big things that this is really going to be useful for business sewers is managing your advertising or social media strategy. You
And
can
your
go
customers.
right and your customers. So you don't have to talk to people that sell garments. about what they do for their social media. There's so many people that are making crafts, handmade things, or selling on social media that you can go and ask them what they're doing, how they're doing it, what their strategy is, how do they add tags. Like, I'm trying to figure out a way to add tags onto my Instagram without having to type every single one out every time on my little tiny phone. So that's something I need to go do to benchmark.
Save a note. Save a note on your phone that you can copy and paste.
I'm thinking about doing that.
My problem is coming up with which tags are appropriate because there's so many, and my brain just automatically goes blank, and I'm like, I don't know.
Right, and you get stuck in a rut. But that's something you can go look into. I think a lot of the other podcasts that deal with, for example, selling an Etsy, they often have experts that come on, or experts that do a lot of social media, talking about the ins and outs of that particular platform. Things you need to look for, like what, this tag should have this many posts, but not more than, this many posts, but not more than this many, so you don't get lost, but not so that dead, that type of thing. That's definitely a benchmarking, and that's a huge thing, because now in this age, you need to have social media presence. You need to have a digital presence, unless you're only selling at craft fairs, which we're in the middle of the pandemic, not happening.
So no one is.
So nobody is. You need to keep that up, and you need to figure out what your strategy is going to be. But how are you going to do that? You can, of course, go about it blindly and just kind of post random things, or only post pictures of your product, or what have you. But wouldn't you rather know or have a roadmap of where to go to save yourself time? So you're not spending all that time advertising, you're spending more time doing what you want to do, which is sewing or making things. There are disadvantages of doing benchmarking, and I feel like we should still mention them, because even though it's a great thing, you should be aware of what might happen.
Right.
There are costs to benchmarking. The number one cost is your time. You have to go find the people to contact. You have to take the time to vet them to make sure that they actually know what they're talking about, and that their techniques are actually good solutions for you. Just because they tell you they do, it doesn't mean it necessarily works that well. There's also costs for measuring. So maybe you need to set up a spreadsheet, or maybe you need to buy a spreadsheet to measure how much fabric you're consuming. There's also time involved in measuring, because sometimes, just going on your merry old way without having to stop and measure, measuring will take up some of your production time.
What is that? Oh, there's a very old phrase about the man won't stop to sharpen his axe because he's working so hard that he can't take the time to stop and sharpen his axe. But if he would only stop and sharpen his axe, it would take him less time to cut down each tree.
Right.
And so, sometimes that is what you're doing, is you're balancing, okay, like, do I really need to take the time to stop and sharpen my axe right now? Or do I just need to nose to the grindstone, get through? Or if I stop and sharpen my axe, am I going to save myself a measurable amount of time that is going to be worth the time that I took?
Right. So ideally, if you're benchmarking, you're going to want to find something that's going to have the highest probability of paying off for you, because a lot of times benchmarking will involve reworking, retooling. Now, to use less technical terms, it'll involve you changing how you do things. So you have to get used to it. It might involve you moving your sewing room around, so you have a different setup, so it's a little bit more efficient. For example, you want to have a cutting station and a sewing station with your serger next to your sewing machine, so you don't have to keep moving your machine out of the way and put the serger up. You might have to rework
or
things.
It could mean you have a serger cover stitch combo, and the amount of time it takes to switch over is just not worth it. And so
you
you
can just
need
get
to
a
sell that
cover stitch.
And I was going to say sell that and buy two separate ones, or just add another machine. Right. Yeah.
Right. Same thing I've seen people that do setups with two different colored threads. So they have one whole setup with dark thread and one whole setup with light thread for their serger, just because it's such a pain in the butt for some of them to rethread. Like, I've got a baby lock, so I have the touch air the threading, and I do not think if I got a regular overlock or serger I would ever use it, because it's so much easier but that's a hint, by the way. It's so much easier to just push it in and then push a button and then it goes, and I don't have to do all that finagling.
A Juki 1000 is on my wish list that also has a air threading.
Ooh.
But it can be, with the having two separate colors, it could be you have a light setup and a dark setup, and all you're changing then is that left needle. Where if you have black thread in your serger and you're going to sew something white, it's still going to show even if you change your left needle. So that's why they have that. They can change that left needle to match their garment a little bit better, but the other three threads can stay the same dark or light color. It just won't show through.
Right. And that's a way to do benchmarking by seeing how people set up or how many machines they have. But that's a way to see how they save time because setup time definitely takes time. For
Right.
example, some of the big auto manufacturers, they shut down for a whole month to retool. So they do not retool very often. And that's
Right.
they only make one item on that car line or one type of vehicle on that car line, not even type, one model on that car line. And every time they do an update for refresh, they have to redo retooling. It takes a whole month out. Now imagine they're kicking out a car every couple of minutes. How many cars they're losing out on. So they try to avoid retooling unless absolutely, absolutely necessary. So you can boil
Right.
that down to yourself and be like, how much am I retooling? How much am I changing out needles or thread or having to move my machines out of the way so I can cut? Is it possible to get a station for cutting? Is it possible to do all my cutting all at once and then only retool, meaning getting my my sewing machines up once for this run that I'm doing?
Would it be more worth it to buy two non-air threading, slightly less fancy sergers so that I can have two setups, or is it really worth my money to save up for that one bigger one? Those same sorts of questions.
Oh, that's a whole different episode, my dear. To answer it
Right, but that has to do
shortly,
with
the
the retooling
the
with,
correct from a retooling standpoint, it's better to have two.
right.
However, retooling is not the only consideration you should think about. In industrial engineering, there's something called engineering economics. So you figure out the lifetime cost of that machine, how long it's likely to live or work. There's also things called a depreciation for tax purposes that you have to take into account. For machines, it's a little harder because it's not a very high cost item compared to what depreciation I've been doing. I was doing depreciations for things
Right.
like bulldozers and multi-million dollar equipment, which I hope no one has a multi-million dollar sewing equipment if they're a small business. If you are, you're doing really good. So that's something that you need to take into account, not just doing the two setup. So you have to think if the cheaper, as it were, machine is going to break earlier, or is it going to require more service? How much is that going to cost over the lifetime of that machine that you can use?
But sometimes that's a vote in favor of the cheaper one because if it's more mechanical and the more expensive one is computerized,
Correct.
there
You
might
might
be
have
more.
a problem with a more expensive one. It's computerization going out. The other consideration, and it has nothing to do with setup and breakdown time, is that if you've got two machines and one breaks, you're not completely SOL. You could
Right.
always retool and use the other machine. So you have a backup machine, as it were. I'm not advocating for two machines because I've only got the one serger, but that's a consideration if you are somebody who's sewing for work, for business,
Mhm.
or to make money. You probably want as little amount of downtime as possible.
Not even just because it's broken, but because you might need to take it in for a service or whatever. But yes, we
Correct. And
did
you can
kind
still
of
continue.
wander away
We
from where we
wandered away
were.
from the topic, but this is, I feel like it's still good information to use. And Branalyn's looking for an excuse to buy her Juki. So
I am. No.
I neither gave her permission nor denied her.
I
Um,
I I have a little bit too much of that Dave Ramsey mindset where I have got to save up more money before I go buy that expensive of a machine.
That's a good idea. And by the way, we are going to have another episode on managing your own personal finances. So stay tuned for that. I've got a great guest
Yes.
lined up for it. So if you don't know who Dave Ramsey is, please look it up. And if you're going to read his book, read at least the first, I would say, 3 chapters. Don't get too bogged down in the later chapters. The first 3 chapters are excellent, or the first 3 steps.
Or do like my husband read it and he was like, "This is what we're gonna do," and I was like, "Okay, just
Oh,
give me the bottom line
the bottom
because
line.
I, while I do like details, uh, money stuff just makes me feel a little crazy." So he was like, "This is what we're gonna do," and
I
then
love money stuff.
I was on board after that. So
Okay, so let's get back to the topic, even though this is all
yes.
useful. Sources for benchmarking ideas. So, Branalyn, can you think of any good sources for benchmarking? I'm going to give you a pop quiz.
Well, I just mentioned earlier that I had heard about weighing fabric on a small business sewing Facebook group, and so that was a really great source. And there might be some more direct competitors, but there's also things like that that you might not get from another kind of crafter. And if they're in that group, they're willing to both give and take some information in that group.
Right. So some of
Um,
the small business Facebook groups, sewing Facebook groups that we get a lot of value is the Business of Sewing by KP. It's KPEA. And then which one are you in?
that's okay. That's the one I'm most active in. And then there's another one that's called Small Business Sewing Chit Chat, I believe, that I'm in. Um, and that one is nice because you can talk about your business there. There's no like don't plug yourself rule, but I don't get quite as much value out of that right now. And that might too be related to just where I am in things, not necessarily where the group is.
I'm also in the Business of Sewing Facebook group. That's been off and on whether it's been valuable or not, because there's, of course, still some people that are just promoting themselves and not actually contributing. Another area is sewing blogs. You can look at people who blog about sewing. So it's specifically ones that do techniques, because that'll probably be the most helpful to
Right.
find easier techniques to do things like how to invert a all-in-one facing instead of trying to put on bias tape, for example. I hate bias tape.
Or not blogs, but vlogs with a V. And
Oh,
so,
vlogs. Yes,
yes,
vlogs.
yes.
Like
Um,
Branalyn's.
well, yes, but
Daily
I
Says
don't know
and
if it's a
Sewing.
vlog really, but sometimes it is. But a lot of tutorials on YouTube are really, really, really helpful. And people are going to put information on YouTube because if they get their channel monetized, then they're going to get money for that. So
Right, they have
it's
more
not the same
incentive to do
thing.
it.
Right, exactly. And it's not the same thing as going and asking somebody, hey, can you tell me how you do this? And they're like, well, it's not going to give me any value to do it. Well, it is going to give them value if they're making a money from ad revenue on that. So um,
Correct.
the YouTube has a lot of things with tutorials and with, like you said earlier, craft room tours
Mhm.
and things like that, where you can see what people are doing and how they're doing it. And usually they'll tell you why they're doing it that way. And either you can go, well, that is a terrible idea, or you can go, oh, that is a great idea. I
I'm
want
gonna
to use
try
that.
that. So while
And
you're
then,
doing all this, you probably want to keep a notebook or a
yes,
Pinterest board or something so you can keep track of all of these ideas and then keep track of whether or not it's applicable for you and whether or not it's worked for you.
that's a good point too, because sometimes you think something is such a great idea and you
And then you
want to,
forget.
well, yes, that too. But I was going to say, sometimes you think something is such a good idea and you want to try it, but then you realize it's just not going to work for you. It's just not going to work for your situation. And so being able to kind of see that a little bit more clearly by writing it down and coming back to it later might be really helpful.
Right.
Something that I was going to say earlier and kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. I took some classes on Craftsy back when Craftsy was a big thing on pattern drafting, and then I have done absolutely nothing with it. But one of the things that was really interesting to me was when she was talking about drafting, she was talking about drafting it for production sewing. And she kind of went in a little bit on how production sewing happens. And it wasn't even supposed to be any sort of idea for you to use in your own sewing, but it definitely started my brain thinking that way. And so the person who was teaching this class was a fashion design school owner. And so there might be some other things where, it's somebody in a slightly related field, like a fashion designer or fashion design school or, you know, something along those areas where you might be able to get some good information from them about how to tweak things in your smaller production based on what large productions do.
So I actually wrote that down in the notes. So you go to fashion design schools. The community college near me has a highly ranked fashion design school. So you might be able to just to audit or take one of the courses just for that one topic. You might have to
Yeah.
do a little bit of fancy talking to get in, but just to learn those techniques so you can try to apply it to yourself. But again, that's time you're taking to do it,
And money.
and money, right? So
If you're going to take a community college course, that might end up being several $100s.
correct, but it might be worth it for you if you can
Right.
increase your production time by say 50%.
And we also hope that our podcast is a source of ideas for you. We're going to have
to it. You've got this far into it. I hope so.
Not just this episode, but with the guests that we have planned, we hope that you'll be able to get a lot of information out of the podcast that will help you think about things that you might not have thought about before, as far as techniques that you might use, or ways to price your product, or ways to manage your finances. And this is all small little sneak peeks into what is coming. This
self-care too.
Yes.
Everything's holistic. Not to sound woo-woo-y, but you're a person. Everything is one big bubble.
Sometimes stopping to sharpen your axe doesn't mean anything to do with the actual tools that you have at your disposal. But it might be taking care of you. Exactly.
So the last source that I came up with was finding similar businesses, like we're talking about earlier, that do a different niche, but a similar idea. So if you're a garment manufacturer, talking to people that make leather goods would be a great resource, especially for consumption and cutting. Leather's typically more expensive to use. It's harder to cut, although they don't have the same types of shapes that a garment manufacturer might have. You probably want to talk to them. Or say you make quilts and you want to figure out a better way of determining fabric combinations or color combinations. You can go ahead and talk to somebody that's color blocking for garments for kids, for example. You can talk to shoemakers. I don't know if there's a lot of independent handmade shoemakers anymore, but they're around. You can talk to doll makers. My auntie's actually an award-making doll maker for porcelain dolls, and she makes all of the little tiny garments herself with all of the patterns for it. And they're usually incredibly detailed and incredibly fancy with very fine, tiny beading and everything. You can find out how they set up for that crafter.
You have to be very precise if you're doing it on such a small scale. Right. So she might be somebody that was a really good resource for very precision sewing.
And for pattern making, because she knows how to do all these alterations for she does like Victorian and vintage style dresses for her garment. She's made a Marie Antoinette dress and some other Baroque dresses and things. And some of these she's having to generate a pattern for her doll just from a picture and recreate it as closely as possible. So there's like passementerie, there's frills and flounces and everything. And she paints the dolls, she fires them. Anyway, so you might want to go and look around in your circle of people that do similar things, that make similar things, especially for a business side. Ask them what they do to solve this problem, or ask them, hey, can I come hang out with you for a day or two and see what you're doing? Of course, you shouldn't be visiting them in person right now, but you get the drift.
Eventually, the pandemic will be over.
Maybe you'll be listening to this next year and you'll all be happy and healthy. And you can go visit somebody. And another point, just because they're not necessarily making it to sell doesn't mean they don't have something of value. They might have a technique or a trick that you haven't thought of that might just blow your mind. I'm not guaranteeing it, but they might. So keep your mind open and see what your network has. Start off with your network and see how it goes. See if you find any really cool tricks or tips from who you know to help improve your sewing or help improve your business.
After the pandemic is over. But as you're going about your daily life, and if you go through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru and you realize how incredibly efficient they are at getting you through the drive-thru.
They have industrial engineers plan that, by the way.
I'm sorry?
They have industrial engineers plan all that, by the way.
Oh, nice. Well, I was going to say, you might think, okay, how did they do this? How did they make this smooth? How can I implement this? It might be the way the grocery store, I don't know. I'm going to
something so you see how it displays and looks nice.
Right, exactly.
Display. One of my pattern drafting teachers, because I took pattern drafting years and years ago, she said you should always keep that curiosity in your life. And if you always stay curious, you will go very far. And in this case, being curious about how things are done, how they get things so efficient, or how they make something look so good, and then reaching out and asking the person, saying, hey, your flat lay for your Instagram is so impressive. Tell me, like, what's your secret? Like, what's the best thing you found that works? Or you maybe not in your drive through Chick-fil-A. Like, how you just watch them, see how they have it set up for, one person does one thing at a time instead of one person makes a whole burger all at once. Or sorry, Chick-fil-A, it's not burgers. It's chicken.
The chicken thing.
One person mans the waffle fries. That's
there you go.
Like, they don't go and they don't peel the potatoes and then cut them, and then they just do the waffle fries in the fryer. That sort of thing. You can always get ideas from all over the place.
We just threw a lot of information at you, but the point of all of this that we were talking about, this benchmarking to measure your results and find ways to do things better. What we're going for is faster sewing, less waste, and techniques that are easier for you to do. All of that adding up is going to hopefully net a better profit for you.
Right, a better profit or save time so you have more time to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
Like spend time with your family.
Right.
And which
like
is
fold the clothes that are piling up. Yeah. They're clean. They're just piling up over there.
Folded. But the whole point is to improve your process so you can either make more money, save time, which again still leads to making more money, find a better way of doing things so you can garner more better clients or better customers, or find techniques that are easier to do to save yourself. Because as a maker, and we will get into this in a different episode, you definitely should listen to it. As a maker, you're using your hands a lot. So the risk is getting something called repetitive stress syndrome or repetitive stress disorder or injury. So that's things like carpal tunnel, tendonitis, tennis elbow. If you have something that's easier to do on your hands, then you can reduce the risk of getting these injuries, which means you'll still be able to create more and not be in pain. That's a non-tangible result of doing benchmarking.
Well, it's one of those things that's not tangible until suddenly it is.
Yeah, having had a chronic injury, it's a big deal. But that's another topic.
Yes, and we have some really awesome guests lined up to talk about pretty much everything that we've mentioned here. Wrapping us up, Kathleen, benchmarking, thinking about your industrial engineer brain and your sewing brain and your business brain. What are your final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
So I think you need to start off first measuring what you're already doing. You need to find out how much fabric you're using, how hard it is to do a particular technique, how long it takes you to make a garment on average. So you know your costs, figuring out what a per unit cost is, per time cost, all in, everything. You should holistically look at it. So it's not just your pure sitting down making it. You need to look at the time it takes you to source things, the time it takes you to do advertising, the time it takes you to package and mail things. Look at every instance and see what you can improve. Then you go find people that are doing things superlatively better than you and ask them what they're doing, or see if you can find a YouTube video and see what their solution is. Implement that solution and see if your time has changed or your costs have reduced or the ease of doing something has gotten better. Take notes, see what works. If it doesn't work, get rid of it and take a note that, hey, that didn't work. Don't forget, like in 6 months, I'm like, oh, let's try this. Right. I mean, you can, of course, revisit it. Maybe you've gotten more used to the technique, but in general, you just abandon it and keep going and go back to your old way. So you want to measure basically in 2 points, right? Before you start and after you've done it, and figure out if it's an improvement. And then just start educating yourself on improving your techniques. You need to be an avid consumer and incredibly curious about all areas of your business. So you still should be looking at things like, how do I do my social media better? How do I take pictures better if I don't have a professional photographer doing it for me? How do I interact? Like, how do I want to interact with my customers better? How do I improve my shipping? How do I get the shipping costs down? How do I package things? That sort of thing. You need to have an avid curiosity about your business and about not just the sewing techniques. And then you'll improve everything. I'm hoping. I shouldn't say I'm hoping, but you'll improve everything if you just try to learn more about every little aspect that you're managing, or figure out ways to find someone that's good at what they do and outsource that to them if it's worth the cost.
And because you've been measuring it from the beginning, you can look back, even though it might feel like you haven't made progress, you can look back and see that you have. And then, correct, as you said earlier, that's encouraging and helps you continue to improve.
In this sense, you're almost trying to do the opposite of losing weight, but you want to gain money and time. You want to be
Yes.
continue. You want to lose weight, but you also want to gain money and time. You want to continuously see how you're improving. And if something's not working, you want to stop doing that and try something different and see how
Right.
that works. So this is an incredibly powerful concept, and I'm sure many of you are already doing parts of it, perhaps not from a purposeful standpoint where you're keeping track and you're just doing it off of feel, like, oh, this feels so much easier, or like, oh, I remember when this took 10 hours and it takes 5 hours type of thing. But if you are very purposeful in keeping track, then that's a much better approach to take for your business.
And if you're not a production sewer, if you're not doing this as a business, that might be the way to do it. It might be, what technique do you like better? What feels better? But if you're doing this to make money, you really need to be able to quantify and qualify the things that you're doing.
Right. What gets measured gets managed.
Friends, if you found this helpful, which Kathleen just had amazing information for us today that I didn't even realize how that would all fit together, but it went together great. If you found value in this, please like, subscribe, leave a review for us. Join us in our Facebook group, the Small Business Sewing Community, and like us on Facebook at the Small Business Sewing Podcast. And Kathleen, what is the question you would like people to answer in our Facebook group this week?
What's your number one tip for automating your social media? Because I need help with that. And I'm sure, Branalyn, you need help with that. And many people would love to hear your number one tip on managing your social media.
I like how I can use the business suite and post to Facebook and Instagram at the same time and schedule it. But I need a lot more tips on how to use that effectively. So yes, please come share some tips for us.
Yeah, this has been Kathleen and Branalyn.
And Branalyn.
I was going to forget you, from the Small Business Sewing Podcast. Thanks for listening. Okay, bye.